Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. In today's first segment, we're going to discuss those election results coming out of the United Kingdom. It's no surprise, really, at some level, that Boris Johnson has kept his promise of winning the office of Prime Minister, as he was, of course, Prime Minister at this time. His party has won a resounding overall majority in this snap general election, being held, of course, in December after about 100 years or so in this month. Certainly, no politician wanted to be the one calling for this election, but as Johnson there said, as well as his party members, that they had no choice but to call for this election in order to have further clarity going into Brexit, the final stages of Brexit, that is, as well as other issues plaguing the UK at this time. What went wrong for Labour also seems to be the question on many people's minds this morning there in the UK. Was it about Jeremy Corbyn not being able to connect with the people? Was it about the manifesto, which was possibly too detailed and long for people to be able to connect with? Or was it just the fact that Labour did not have and does not currently have a good strategy vis-a-vis Brexit as well, considering these were called the Brexit elections, something that many people, again, have argued against, saying that there are a lot of other issues as well, as I said, plaguing Britain. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Linda Baznat, who is a barrister and Brexit consultant. She's joining us now from Surrey, UK. Also joining us from London is Patrick Sullivan, who is Chief Executive Officer of the leading UK think tank Parliament Street. And finally, joining us from Bristol in the UK is Bola Adediran, who is a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of the West of England. Bola, Patrick, and Linda, good morning to all three of you. Linda, let me start with you. What do you make of these election results? Polls had already predicted this, so not too much of a surprise, certainly.
Not too much of a surprise, but maybe a bigger majority than anyone was expecting leading up to the actual election. But what this actually does is it gives business a huge boost. With regard to the Labour Party's threat of nationalising rail, water, the mail system and so on, their shares have shot up this morning with the result of the Conservative victory. And also the fact that Boris has already been on and spoken about the people that would normally vote Labour that have given him their vote this time and thanked them for that, and have actually said that he is hoping to be able to do the best for everybody and not just the usual Conservative voters.
Patrick, as you know, Corbyn, as well as others in the Labour Party, have said the results went this way because the country is suffering from Brexit fatigue. I mean, I'm sure all of us can agree that we're all suffering from Brexit fatigue as well, speaking about this ever since that referendum was held a number of years ago. But is that really the reason here, or do you think Labour just messed up when it came to these elections?
I think this is a corrective election. What happened in 2017 was that the Conservative Party allowed the media to portray this idea that they had it in the bag. As a result, when people were voting in that election, they weren't voting for who would be the best Prime Minister, but they were voting on who would be the best Member of Parliament. So you had some good constituency Labour MPs who were returned to Parliament because people thought there was no chance of Jeremy Corbyn ever becoming Prime Minister. As a result, Jeremy Corbyn did a lot better than he should have done, because if you remember in that election campaign, people were talking about the Conservatives getting a majority of sort of 150 or some such, quite similar to Tony Blair in 97. And that sort of mismanagement of the expectations game is what really worked in Corbyn's favour. This time round, what the Conservative Party did is it was laser focused on making sure that people knew that there was a real threat of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister. Yeah. I know anecdotally, I've got a few friends who run small businesses, and they were absolutely terrified about this idea of Jeremy Corbyn coming in, nationalising business, scaring inward investment away from the UK. That turnout was, I think, was probably the largest it's been in probably about 50 years, I would say.
Okay, so Bola, what are your thoughts on that? Because certainly then one of the concerns that came out during the campaign was when Corbyn spoke about the fact that the NHS would at some level be privatized, right? It would be part of a trade deal, possibly with the United States as well. Is that an area of concern? Do you think Johnson may very well go ahead and do that, even though, of course, he's denied it? And then what do you make of the concerns on the part of businesses that, that Corbyn is and was seeking to nationalize a lot of things?
No, I quite agree with your last speaker that there is a sense in which a lot of people have been quite scared of the possibility of Jeremy Corbyn becoming the Prime Minister. And there has been a sense in which the Conservatives have also fed into some of those fears by pointing out some of the policies that Labour might initiate, which would run counter to many of the things that people are accustomed to. Particularly, for example, a couple of during the election campaign, we heard a lot about the Labour scrapping MI5, and we also had a lot of concerns ranging from the tax raise that Labour would be instituting. That was a concern to a lot of people. So there was a sense in which, yes, people were quite scared of a Jeremy Corbyn's Prime Minister getting into number 10 Downing Street. But I think what was more important was the fact that Jeremy Corbyn himself failed disastrously, not only in terms of the fact that he failed to connect with voters, but also in terms of he failed to assuage the fears of voters and to understand exactly what people were looking for. There was a sense in which is deterring on Brexit was not helpful. The fact that he sat on the fence on Brexit was not helpful. And this has been a theme of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party for a long time. He has failed to commit himself to many things, and a lot of people have been very, very skeptical of his leadership. So it was no brainer for me at all. From the beginning of the elections, I had seen it coming that this was going to be a disaster for Labour because Jeremy Corbyn is not popular. There was the questions of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party that has not been addressed. There are questions, and Labour failed to even deal with Conservative lies. So it was a disaster from every end, and I'm surprised that it's not even worse, to be honest.
Okay, so then, Linda, let's get to the heart of it, right? These were called the Brexit elections by many. Do you think that this now magically will help the country come out of the EU in a fashion that would be good for the economy as well, preserve jobs, as well as keep the NHS intact as it currently stands, and of course better it?
I think there's an awful lot of work to do, and I don't think magic is going to come into it, quite frankly. But the way that everything is going to be set out over the next few months, obviously Boris is intent on getting the withdrawal bill through by the end of January. It's got to go through the Lords, but he is visiting the Queen today. He'll be doing a speech outside number 10. All of the MPs, the new MPs, will be sworn in on Tuesday. They're hoping to have an opening of Parliament on Thursday so that they can start to push the bill through. If everything goes through at the end of January, of course, we're on to the next stage, which is the free trade agreements with Europe. And there's going to be an awful lot of work around that. It may well be that trying to get everything done by December 2020 is going to be over-ambitious. But having said that, they did say that Boris couldn't change the withdrawal agreement in 3 months, and he did. So there's everything to play for. And of course, it's not just about the UK, but it's about Europe as well. And we've got to work together with our European partners to come up with a deal that is agreeable to both sides, where we all benefit going forward, not just for business, but for our citizens as well.
Speaking about citizens, and Patrick, there are two things that I would see that remain challenges, right? I mean, Boris Johnson claims that he's resolved, of course, the issue of the Irish backstop. I wonder what your thoughts are about that going forward as Brexit now moves forward into the final stages. And secondly, then how Scotland has voted, with the SNP getting a majority there. Again, no surprise on the part of many people, considering Scotland voted to remain. Do you think those two can become obstacles then in the path of Boris Johnson in these final stages?
I don't think so. Firstly, we now have what I would call a rebellion-proof majority for Mr. Johnson, because even with, sort of your ERGs and people like that, the last time round, the DUP basically had a gun to the head of the government and was able to say, well, if you don't give us this or that in regards to Northern Ireland, we'll bring your government down. And that's why sort of Theresa May didn't have much room for manoeuvre. This time round, with a majority of sort of 80 plus, it appears that Mr. Johnson, he's got the largest majority of any Conservative government since 1987. So he can afford to almost lose a few MPs, which means that the DUP is far less of a threat. In addition, Nigel Dodds, who was the leader of the DUP in Parliament, lost his seat. Yeah. So the DUP have sort of suffered in this election, I think, probably as a result of their unwillingness to negotiate. So I don't think Northern Ireland is going to be a huge problem. Normally it isn't a huge problem in British politics. The reason that it was because Theresa May managed to throw away the majority that David Cameron had left her. In regards to Scotland, the SNP will continue to be a loud voice, but they can't get another referendum unless it goes through Parliament. Now, the Conservative Party in Scotland has branded itself as a unionist party. They are the opposition now in Scotland as a result. And they're not going to allow Nicola Sturgeon to have that referendum. Okay. And to be honest, the SNP don't really want another referendum because it was after the last one that they actually became a real force in the Commons. The sort of threat of a referendum and is what gives them their power.
All right, so Bola, how united then is this United Kingdom right now? Because even Johnson, in the speech that he gave, I believe at 3:30 a.m. Last night, he spoke about the fact that he would want to unite the nation. He spoke about one nation. And many people have questioned what one nation exactly is referring to and what that then means because of his rhetoric in the past and because of even the rhetoric during the Brexit campaign, in fact, towards minorities and immigrants, etc. So what do you make of Scotland and all of the above and immigration?
Well, what the election has done is to put bandage temporarily on some issues, but at the same time not healed in any way the vast divisions we have in the country. You only need to travel through the country to see the level of division and the level of disunity that the country continues to face at the moment. And it's not only in the country. Even within the parties, we have different alignments within the party. What would be particularly interesting is post-Corbyn Labour Party, how that is going to pan out. There are divisions within the Labour Party that is already evident, particularly in terms of those who have sympathy to the kind of economics and politics that Corbyn has as represented in the Labour Party since 2015, and those who want to see a more progressive, more centrist Labour Party. So there are divisions everywhere. There are divisions in Labour, there are divisions in Conservative between those who want a different kind of Brexit negotiation and an exit agreement. There are divisions between the North and the South. There are divisions even within the North. So there is a sense in which this election, rather than bring people together, would probably still continue to create division. We'll continue to see the kind of disunity that we've seen over the last few years. Oftentimes when I speak with young people too, in my classes, one of the things that young people are quite sad about is this feeling also that the politics of the country kind of represents ideals and values that are contrary to what they see fit. So there are divisions also there, So I don't think this election has done much in healing those divisions.
All right, so then, Linda, if we're honest, Boris Johnson has said a lot of things throughout his career which many would find unsuitable for anybody now as current prime minister to have said, even when he was a journalist. And we can probably go through a long list of things he said, from calling women in niqab letterboxes, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that such a man can actually unite the UK? And do you also think, as a second part of this question, that minorities, and I'm not just talking about Muslims, but minorities of all colors and races, should actually be worried under this prime minister?
I think you'll find that Boris in the past has been incredibly divisive. There's no doubt about that. But I think he is determined to bring the country together now. And with regard to racism and that sort of thing, I think that will start to calm down now. Remember, we've got an awful lot of investment that is waiting to come into this country, which will give business the huge boost that it needs, and therefore that will relate down to citizens. And with regard to the North-South divide, the investment that will come into this country will come not just out into the South, but also into the North as well. And over a period of time, I think that we will see that it will benefit the country, benefit the UK generally, and bring people together where there has been division, because we are now settled with a decision that is taking the whole country forward, everybody.
Patrick, then what of the concern of the NHS? You know that's, I've understood that's obviously a huge sensitive point for Britons. They value the NHS and the services it provides for them. Do you think that is at stake? Do you think that Johnson would genuinely put that up in a trade deal with the US?
Firstly, the NHS has never been under threat in any sort of trade deal. The question, when it was originally asked to President Trump, he was sort of caught unawares, and he sort of responded, "Oh, everything's on the table." But the NHS has never been on the table. It's not something that, it's often called the third rail of British politics. It's that you cannot touch it. It is almost sacrosanct.
What of that document, Patrick, that Labour candidate Jeremy Corbyn had released? Then, he released it unredacted.
Well, I think it's been proven that those documents were false. And indeed, there was sort of question about Russian meddling in this election, sort of producing sort of false documents that were put on a sort of website called Reddit. I mean, that's not how opposition leaders in the past have got documents like this. It was pretty much amateur hour from the Labour Party. There has never been a threat to the NHS, especially because Mr. Johnson has built his political career very much on investment into the NHS, with his bust during the Brexit referendum, where he said there would be $350 million a week for the NHS. In his comments this morning to party supporters, he said that his government's first priority would be the NHS. I think that the fastest way for Mr. Johnson to lose all the goodwill that he's got is to touch the NHS or to to sort of sell off parts of the NHS. It's just not going to happen.
Okay.
It's politically unfeasible for any government, regardless of their majority, to do such a thing.
Very well, Bola, I'll give you the final word. Just if you can just look back and reflect on this campaign for us, if you can. This is yet another snap election that has been held this year, of course. And as I said, this is after 100 years, and an election has been held in December. Do you think it's gone the way which would be for the benefit of the country? We know that Brexit now is that much more likely to now occur upon the terms that Boris Johnson has agreed with the EU so far. Will this be a good thing? And what do you make of then the misinformation that many would argue was brought up during this campaign, and one can argue from both sides?
Well, I would disagree with you that it's from both sides. I think it's been overwhelmingly from the Tories. I think very clearly that several independent fact checkers have shown that the ads from the Tories, 90% of the ads from one report were apparently very false. So the Tories have led a campaign of all falsehood throughout this campaign, throughout the election period, from the double counting of policies, the double counting of funding towards the NHS, the 40 new hospitals that were supposed to be built or that were going to be built, and we later found out that it's from fact checking that it's only about 6 new hospitals that will be built. In fact, not 6 new hospitals, but 6 that will be refurbished of some sort, and to several other policies that the Tories have put forward. So there has been a clear attempt to completely mislead the public, and in fact, in many respects, that has also increased the need for electoral reforms, and a lot of people have been clamoring for that. But I wanted to respond to Linda's last statement about how this election will heal the divisions within the country. I think I completely disagree with that. I think this election does not heal in any way. In fact, I do not see how that would heal any part of the section of the country. Boris, as she's mentioned, is a very divisive figure. Is been known to say very, very hurtful things to migrants and to people of color within the country. And I don't see how his prime minister, his time as prime minister would be any different. So
okay, Bola, I do apologize for cutting you off. Unfortunately, the clock has gotten the best of us. I know that we have to discuss about what this win for Boris Johnson means, but we of course appreciate all 3 of your time this morning. That was Bola Adediran speaking to us from Bristol, Patrick Sullivan speaking to us from London, and from Surrey, Linda Baznat was joining us as well, giving their insight on this election win for Boris Johnson. Not a surprise, certainly. As I said, major polls before these elections showed that the Conservatives would get a resounding majority. Possibly they've gotten more of a majority than was expected. What went wrong for Labour? Was it simply about Jeremy Corbyn? Was it about a manifesto? Was it about the Brexit strategy that Labour had? God knows. We don't know specifically what it is that didn't work for the voters, but nevertheless, they voted now Conservative. The Conservatives have a majority. Now they have a responsibility to deliver on Brexit and the many other promises that Boris Johnson has made, even vis-a-vis the NHS and otherwise. Then in Scotland, we have the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party, that has won a majority there. Does this mean another referendum? One of our guests said no, this will not be a referendum because, in fact, this sort of opposition situation works well for Nicola Sturgeon and her own political career at this time. We'll see, of course, whether Boris Johnson's able to deliver. Mind you, he has already delivered on the fact that he was able to change a bit of the deal that had been reached with the EU vis-a-vis Brexit. So maybe he'll be able to deliver on Brexit successfully, as well as get a new trade deal with the likes of the United States and others. We'll keep a close eye on that, of course, here in Scope. I'll be back with my next segment, though, after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this second segment of today's show, we're going to discuss the House Judiciary Committee, which held a marathon debate, 13 or 14 hours, according to estimates, about the amendments to 2 articles of impeachment that the Democrats have put forth against President Donald Trump of the United States. The Democrats say that the Republicans were essentially trying to buy time, were trying to delay the process, and therefore the House Judiciary Committee head, Jerry Nadler, Jerry Nadler, then decided to then hold the vote, to delay the vote, I should say, and not to hold the vote yesterday. We were expecting, of course, a result of that, and for this to have moved on then to the House at this time. However, that has now been delayed. We'll wait and see when that vote does take place. Specifically, we're hoping that it'll take place on Friday itself. Let's see if that does work out. But of course, all of this coming because we know about that Ukraine call, as well as other such issues which the Democrats have put forth as well about the presidency of Donald Trump, saying that he has committed criminal acts. Can that actually be proven? Will Donald Trump actually ever be impeached, especially in the Senate, where the Republicans hold a majority? Many people, of course, doubt that. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Allan Dodds-Frank, who is an investigative correspondent based in New York. He's currently, though, joining us from Connecticut in the U.S. He's first investigated Donald Trump in the 1980s. He's formerly been on ABC, CNN, and Bloomberg, and he's former senior editor of Forbes as well. Allan, thank you for your time this morning. What do you make of this delay as it is? I imagine this is just partisanship at play.
Well, partisanship isn't quite the right word. It's a complicated process, and I do think that it is an attempt to maximize coverage, which is the game both sides are playing. I mean, if you watched the hearing yesterday, you would have seen two different dramas, depending on whether the Democrats or the Republicans were talking. The Republicans are clearly playing against the facts, whereas the Democrats are busy trying to keep people, namely the Republicans, from distracting the American populace from what actually happened. It's all a game of mass confusion. So after 14 hours, delaying the vote made a lot of sense to me, anyway.
Do you think that the Democrat argument, Allan, about insisting on broad daylight vote? That's what one of the Democrats said. Representative Jamie Reskin, a Democrat from Maryland, said that the Democrats wanted to hold the vote in broad daylight. Why that insistence?
Well, because as you can see over the last 3 years from President Trump, sometimes what matters most is repetition. I mean, Donald Trump has clearly lied thousands of times, and the American public is buying some of it just by the sheer weight of constant repetition. So if you keep saying something long enough, I mean, now it becomes, at least to many ordinary people who don't spend hours watching the hearings, it becomes seemingly true. So, for instance, you hear people talk about the Mueller report and say, oh, well, it completely exonerated the president. That's what the president has been saying since day one, and that it's a hoax. Yeah. Well, neither of those things is even remotely true. However, that idea has gained some traction, and the Republicans have made quite a point by bringing up Hunter Biden, who did have a job that a lot of people genuinely ask about. How did he get that? Why would they have paid him that money? That's now been injected into the mainstream of political discussion. And that's why the House impeachment hearing was such a show.
All right, so then we know, and you know, Allan, that when this goes to the Senate, the Republicans are not going to obviously vote to impeach Donald Trump. So the question then, for especially a lot of us on the outside looking in, is why create further division within the country? Why would the Democrats want to do this at this time, knowing that at the final stage they will lose?
Well, frankly, I'm not sure that I clearly understand the Democrats' tactics. I mean, in one way, I would think it would make a lot of sense to continue hearings and keep talking about all the things Trump has done wrong and not bring it to a vote for quite a long time, since it's so clear. Remember, he will be impeached. That is an almost certain outcome. It's not quite as certain, but close, that the Senate will go the other way. And if you have been following what's been being discussed, the Senate is talking about having a hearing with no witnesses. Why would they possibly do that? if this is anything that remotely resembles a trial. And the answer is simple. Mitch McConnell and the Republicans don't want anybody to know any more about this than they possibly have to. I mean, to them, this is like running a red light. They just want to zoom through it and hope they don't get arrested.
Then what is kind of an impact does this, do you think, have on the upcoming elections in 2020? That's a question on many people's minds, right? And I asked about the division because it seems that both sides are only essentially, trying to speak to their bases and not the rest of the American people.
Well, that's the challenge for the Democrats, particularly. What the Republicans are doing is just trying to wear everybody out with the constant distractions, the motions that they know are going to go nowhere, the motions that are completely irrelevant, by demanding a roll call vote that everybody be counted one by one. That just is slowing down the momentum. I mean, they're turning a baseball game into a cricket match, meaning something that would last 3 or 4 hours is now going to last days.
Because, I imagine Donald Trump can come out of this, especially when the Senate votes down this impeachment, and, sort of cast himself as a martyr, right? As someone who's come out and won against this witch hunt, as he would like to call it. And he'll win big again, or not win big again, but he'll win possibly big in 2020. Do you think that's a possibility? And then what does that then mean for the next tenure under Trump?
I think the Trump tactic is to lie, and wear everybody out. I mean, to make people so disgusted with politics that the people who are indifferent, who don't always vote, who may be being hurt by Trump and are indignant, don't go to the polls. That's the Republican game. If they can diminish the overall vote by discouraging people, they think they have a better chance to win. And it's sort of a nasty little game. And as are the many efforts by the Republicans, particularly in the southern states, to suppress the vote of minorities. And there's one way to look at this. It's simple. This is a refighting of the American Civil War. This is practically the South against the North. And or in this case, it's the coasts and the urban centers in large part against the less populated parts of the United States. And what Trump has succeeded in doing, like a cult leader, is somehow convincing many of the poorer people that he, a rich guy famous for fleecing thousands and thousands of people who work for him, or who were his customers, that he's on their side. And the success that he's had in doing that, I think, is as much related to his ability to be a bumbling entertainer as anything else.
Very well, Allan. We'll leave it there at that. But of course, we appreciate you getting up this early for us and speaking to us, sharing your insight. That was Allan Dodds-Frank, who is speaking to us from Connecticut in the United States. Of course, this committee hearing was quite momentous and important. It went both ways, partisanship at display. And of course, the vote did not take place even after 13, 14 hours of debate. Jerry Nadler has called for that vote to be delayed. It may possibly take place on Friday. We'll have to wait and see if that does work out and what then the next stages would look like, and whether the Republicans will make this process any easier. Of course, they will not, as both sides seem to be wanting to make a show of this, as Allan there correctly said. Donald Trump is also said to be wanting to make a show of this as well, because he's trying to prove that this is all a witch hunt. These two articles of impeachment, according to him, are non-issues, really, are not even crimes. That's the speech that he gave right after the Democrats actually filed these articles of impeachment against him. We'll wait and see, of course, because there's a lot more to come, certainly, when it comes to these votes that are set to take place. And of course, then the Senate hearing also. Will Donald Trump be impeached? And what effect then does this have on the upcoming 2020 elections there in the United States? We'll keep a close eye on that, of course, here in Scope. I'll be back with my final segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In the final segment of today's show, we're going to discuss the case that Gambia has brought forth at the International Court of Justice, accusing Myanmar of carrying out genocide against the Rohingya peoples. Now, as we know, 700,000+ of Rohingyas have fled from Myanmar, seeking safety from persecution in that country. Their villages have been ransacked and completely razed to the ground, especially in Rakhine State. Aung San Suu Kyi, I should be specific, the Nobel Peace Laureate, who is now the state councillor of Myanmar, has traveled to this UN court to defend her country, saying, and not even in fact using the word Rohingya to describe the people, who she does admit have not been treated well at some level. However, she at the same time provided what she saw as historical context, also saying that the information and the case against Myanmar was incomplete and incorrect. That's part of course, her defense. And she's, of course, saying that her country can itself police itself, i.e. that they can hold their own to account. Can our country really hold its own to account? As the Gambia has said, that is not possible, and that Myanmar has proven that it is not able to hold its own to account. Let's discuss that a bit further. We're joined now by Professor Lyal Sunga, who is a visiting professor at Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. He's joining us now from Rome. Lyal, as always, we appreciate your time. What do you make of the case? What do you make of Suu Kyi's defense?
Well, it's an interesting defense. It is not very convincing, and for several reasons. But basically what she tried to do is to say that, look, the picture that the ICJ has been given by the applicant, which is Gambia, is too narrow. We have to look at the broader facts. And what she tried to do was say, look, we've been holding counterinsurgency, counter-terrorist actions and operations, which are called clearance operations since the 1960s. And that's basically, we have to look now at the situation, she says. It's a non-international armed conflict between the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army and Tatmadaw, the armed forces, as well as some Buddhist militia. Now, she says, well, there have been some excesses. She tries to give a little bit of ground. And interestingly, she says, in the 2008 Constitution, there's military justice, and there have been trials, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you look a little bit more closely at her claims, which are basically to say that, and also she says, this complementarity, which means that it's up to Myanmar to prosecute using military justice and not to jump to the International Criminal Court or to international solutions. Yeah. Now, if you look at those claims, they fall apart pretty quickly. The reasons are the following. First of all, the ARSA, the Arakan army, which she claims is supported by Afghanistan and Pakistan, et cetera, doesn't at all seem to fit her characterization as a real threat, number one. Number two, the military trials she's been talking about, we haven't seen any credible cases. We've seen, I think, one or two out of all the violations that have been going on. And she says, well, we started a court-martial in November 25, 2019. This is just 3 weeks ago. This problem has been going on since 2016. What the hell have they been doing? So this is not very convincing. If you look at the facts and the numbers, it falls apart pretty quickly. The other thing she said, if I may just complete this thought, is that she said, how can it be that we have genocidal intent on the part of the Myanmar forces when we're prosecuting, and we have courts of military justice? Yeah. Well, they're not exclusive. The Nazis also prosecuted some Nazi soldiers and officers, but they also had clearly genocidal intent. So it's a bit of a non sequitur there.
Indeed. Lyal, one of the things that people have said when it comes to just the laws, the internationals right now, when it comes to the Geneva Convention, Genocide Convention, they say that the Gambia would have to prove that it currently has a disagreement directly with Myanmar. And many are saying that legally, for Gambia to be able to prove that may prove difficult, and that the Myanmar and Aung San Suu Kyi may ride on that then to get themselves out of this.
It's still a possible objection, but I saw this earlier as an obstacle. But the fact is that Myanmar has and Aung San Suu Kyi has decided to show up herself, which is great. I'm glad to see that. And I think it's for not necessarily reasons of justice, but and I don't want to sound very cynical here, but there are 2020 elections coming up in Myanmar, and some people have suggested that it's to rally her support. And apparently there's been a lot of popular support in Myanmar for her standing up against foreign interference, et cetera, et cetera. So strangely enough, Aung San Suu Kyi seems to be quite proud to defend her government's record, which is a really shameful one, and maybe for very cynical political reasons. Now, that's a little bit speculative on my part, but the point of that is that we seem to be beyond the I think, the jurisdictional element of a dispute. And in any case, Article 9 of the Genocide Convention clearly says that one state party to the Genocide Convention can bring another state party to the convention, which is the case Gambia and Myanmar, both state parties to the Genocide Convention, shall submit their disputes on interpretation and application of the convention to the International Court of Justice. So I think now that is cleared. And so what Aung San Suu Kyi and her agent, William Shabas has argued is, well, in order to, at this stage, for Gambia to succeed in its application to have provisional measures, which is for an immediate cessation of these very harmful activities that the armed forces are engaging in against the Rohingya. There has to be proof of subjective intent, which is a very hard thing to prove.
Indeed. So however, in the middle of all this, Lyal, I do apologize for cutting in, but in the middle of all this, certainly our human beings, Rohingya, are right now stuck in Cox's Bazar and elsewhere, suffering obviously because they're not in their homes back home in Myanmar. Do you think that situation will at any level be resolved through this process? Because this, from what I've understood, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, can be stretched for years, this process, right?
I'm confident that the way is open to have some quick resolution to the suffering. I don't want to sound overly optimistic or idealistic, but what I'm going to say is that Myanmar, if it shows the political will, and at least they've showed up at the ICJ, which is a major thing, if they feel that, yes, they would respect the ICJ's provisional orders, and the ICJ decides to order one of the requests of the Gambia, which is for the safe return, dignified resettlement back from the people that are in Cox's Bazar back to their home areas. That would relieve the situation quite a lot. So there is that possibility, and it does depend on the political will and the respect. If there's if Aung San Suu Kyi would show that for the international rule of law. So we're seeing that she's come in person. That's a very important sign. And that is a very high profile. And let's be hopeful that maybe she would that the ICJ would order this provisional orders, and that they would be respected. That's a possibility.
Okay. Well, we'll leave there at that, Lyal. But of course, as always, we appreciate your taking your time out to share your insight with us. Time, of course, on a very important case that is in front of the International Court of Justice, viewers, that of Gambia bringing this case against Myanmar of genocide or genocidal intention at the very least against the Rohingya peoples. As we know, 700,000 of them currently have left the country, fleeing persecution there as their homes have been razed, ransacked, and they're not being welcomed back. The situation back home in Myanmar is not such for these refugees to return back to their own country. Rohingya is a word that Aung San Suu Kyi has not even used in her defense when speaking about the very people who we all, of course, see as the world's most persecuted minority, that according to the United Nations itself. We'll keep a very close eye on that situation at the ICJ. Certainly, this may stretch for years, but will the court ask for provisional measures to defend the Rohingya people? That too, we'll wait and see. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.